do something bigger today so that yesterday's accomplishment looks small in your eyes. That's the way to become a person who is great and remains great, because you must stay relevant. I am Blessing Eichie. I intend to do bigger things today so that yesterday's achievement does not surpass what is going to happen today. I believe Dr. Idahosa Osamhanze has same goal today. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Blessing. It's another week. We're not giving up on hope, and hope never disappoints, like they say. Trusting God that we're going to do greater things this week, and it's getting better for us on a daily basis.
Okay, this is the FrontBurners. You're welcome to the Monday's edition. It's the first day of a working week. We're looking fresh and strong, set to treat you to a wonderful time. You know what the show is about? We treat critical issues here with a view to inspiring change. Let's get on now to the corner where a lady is standing by to bring you something you don't want to miss. That lady is Swift Aderita. This morning, she's all set looking like a boss lady. All right, it's time for us to take a look at other stories that made it into the news. So let's check out some very interesting headlines. When I read out the first one to you, you would know, of course, that this is very interesting, especially if you've been house hunting or perhaps you've gone through several cities and you find very, very beautiful buildings, houses, but they're unoccupied. Well, this is what the Minister of Housing and Urban Development, architect Ahmed Musa, says. So the federal government is to penalize owners of unoccupied buildings to tackle housing deficits. The federal government announced this plan to impose financial penalties on owners of unoccupied buildings as part of efforts to reduce Nigeria's housing deficit. So according to the Minister of Housing and Urban Development, architect Ahmed Musa Dangiwa, he revealed this in an exclusive interview. And he says that property owners who fail to lease or sell their vacant buildings may face higher ground rent charges. Oh, and he goes on to say that it makes no sense that there is housing deficit, yet there are buildings unoccupied. The owners do not want to sell or lease them. Doc, do we call this a good reform, a good policy, some that will ensure that people can get housing in choice areas without having to actually pay through your nose?
Well, I think I don't really have a full grasp of what the minister wants to achieve by putting a fine on people who refuse to sell or lease their property. I think there are two issues here. The first issue is that there are a lot of unoccupied property, especially when you get to Abuja really right now. And those property actually don't even have owners.
They don't? So
yeah, they don't.
Erected
A lot of property scattered over the places don't really have owners.
How do you mean?
And this has been on for quite a while. And I think it was even since 2015, because people who were public officers who own homes and, you know, having to prove that those houses belong to them as civil servants is difficult. So some people actually have abandoned some of their properties, and you cannot really determine the distance. So when you drive really from the town, you're going to the airport, you see a whole lot of buildings, and you cannot really put a hand and say, who is the owner of this property? And that's one side of it, that if government had waited maybe a while and cannot find the owners of the property, maybe it's to first and foremost able to take them over. Maybe their owner will surface or something. Yeah. But if somebody has abandoned a house for like 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years now, and he has not occupied it, and he's not letting it, and then you want to put a fine on it. So who's going to pay the fine? So I think that's where I'm saying that I really do not understand what he wants to achieve with this kind of policy statement. So if you say you want to put a fine on a house whose owner you have not been able to identify,
who's going to pay?
Who's going to pay the bill? Maybe the house itself will pay for itself. Or maybe it's a way to say government will want to seize those property. That if the fine is levied, and after a while, and of course, Now, but then you have to also find out, who are you going to actually address this fine to? Is it that you're going to put the fine on the house so that anytime the owner passes through there and see that there's a fine on the house, because names are not attached to it? And this is what one had been saying and advocating. Therefore, Nigeria to be able to actually rid itself of all the kind of issues that we talk about, whether it's corrupt practices, what we need to do first and foremost is to ensure that we do proper census and then, of course, biometric identification.
The minister says sorry to butt in that, but the minister says that's going to happen, that they're already trying to carry out a census of all the unoccupied buildings in Nigeria.
Yeah, because that's the starting point. It's not defined at the starting point. So that we know who owns what property, and then, of course, it's tied to their name. Just the way, of course, your BVN and NIN is synced. So whatever property you have in this country, once you have a name and biometrics are taken, and we know this is the rightful owner of this property. And that's quite important, because in the longer run, actually, it will also help to forestall litigations that are always associated with transfer of ownership of land, that you know who is the actual owner of title. I'll give you one example. I think it's MFM. I understand in the last how many years that particular land where their camp is had been transferred or bought 3 times, because the original owner that was bought from, somebody took the case to court and the person won, and then of course he has to repurchase, and then somebody else went to court, and now you come back from court, then you have to repurchase.
Wow.
And now the case is still in court.
So the mayor has to repurchase.
So one is really worried and says, on what basis are this kind of judgment passed? Because there is a lot of problem in terms of determining who is the actual owner of a property, because we don't have sign and seals append to some of all this building. And I think that's the first starting point that the minister should have told, and see, how do we register all the houses? So we know who owns what house. And then, of course, at the click of a button, government can say, oh, this house belongs to XYZ. And when that property is sold and transferred to somebody else, then, of course, we can check and say, okay, now this property has been transferred officially. And then it's moved into that person's biometrics. And then we can say, okay, this property has moved ownership from this person and it's now belonging to this person. That's one side of the conversation. Then the second side of the conversation is the fact that we're also looking at people who have invested money to build estates. Today, we know what a bag of cement costs to build a house. And now, if I'm an owner of a house and I build a house and I want to sell the house, I cannot sell below the cost of building. It doesn't make economic sense. So whether there are housing deficits or not, I also be thinking of how I'm going to recoup my investment on that property. So I cannot say because I'm looking for somebody to occupy the house, I have to sell below price.
What about leasing? You may not have to sell.
No, it's the same principle apply. So if I'm going to lease my building, I'm also going to calculate. Now, because you also have to factor in the wear and tear of people who are going to occupy the house. So I have a building that I have spent millions of naira to build, and then, of course, I have to lease it. I'm thinking that in a period of 20 years, 30 years, I should be able to recoup the investment in that property. Now, I'm also calculating how much rent am I going to get from this property to be able to recoup it in this period of time. Assume I take a mortgage and I'm going to be paying back. Now, what am I going to be paying back? I'm going to be paying back what the interest of the bank is. So if I lease it out at below market value, will the Minister of Housing come to pay the cost of servicing the debt? So all these issues have to be put completely on the table before you can be thinking of putting a fine on somebody who's not leading the house. And there will be a reason for it. And I think one of the things that we are actually not doing very well is the fact that we don't engage with people. So has the minister actually done some form of engagement? Like, for example, this is an estate, and this estate is built, and we're okay, who's the owner of the estate? And we say, why are people not coming into this property? Take, for example, in China, for example, there have been a lot on property loss because people are not renting. So if you go to Europe, you find property issues. People are not renting. People who are putting money in the real estate in some Asian countries are having challenge, even getting people to come and buy the house or lease the house. So how will a fine solve that problem?
So this is what the minister intends to do. When they're done with the census, it intends to increase the ground rent. So the example he gave is that if you're supposed to lease maybe annual rent for the property supposed to be 5 million naira, and then you'll charge 3 million naira as ground rent. So you would then do the math and say, if I have to pay this as ground rent for not leasing or renting out the building, then I have to just rent out, because why would I be losing 3 million instead of gaining 5 million? But on the other hand, let's look at it this way. Yes, there may be issues, there may be challenges due to cost that the owner of the building has actually put in. So they're considering who would pay for it. But I think it's beyond that. There are those who just want to acquire and hold on to property. The same thing with land. You have people who do land speculation. You have people who buy land in large amounts. They could buy an expanse of land that they do not intend to use in the next 5 years, even 10 years. They just buy it and then they hold on to it. Now, those who want to buy and develop, what that means is, if this is a new community that is developing and somebody has already bought maybe like 1 hectare of land, which the person or the company does not intend to use, but they just want to hold on to it and wait for it, the value of the land to appreciate before they begin to sell in bits. So what that means is that for the period of time they are holding on to that land and not selling, those who would need maybe 1 plot, 2 plots, it becomes difficult for them to have access to land in that area. Even if they do, it becomes very expensive. I believe that's the aspect that the minister wants to handle here. But like you said, it takes data to do this. Now, how do people begin to build houses and that the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development does not have the record of who owns what building? In every area, there's delineation. So you know that for this particular area, we can have access to the files of people who own properties in this area. So you can begin to check, except if things are not done in the manner in which they should be done, where it's easy for you to have access to records, then it becomes very difficult, except you now have to spend money to do a census. So where that is done and the owners of the buildings are identified, I believe that the ministry already knows some of the owners. That's why they have in mind to actually have ground rent increased for them. Yeah, so what they are saying is that they may not be able to force anybody to sell or to lease, but they want to use the ground rent to deter.
Yeah, but is it logic that we need to query here? Is it logic? So if you want to charge ground rent and increase ground rent for a property of somebody else because you feel that the person is not leasing. Now, what I'm saying is you also need to hear from the guy why he's not leasing.
But how many interviews are they going to do?
Oh, yes, of course. This doesn't cost so much. You see, this is where you're talking about data. Data is simple. For example, the Ministry of Housing can commission an agency who will go to do those interviews and find out why people are not letting their houses. It's a scientific way of arriving at a decision. So you can't stay in your office and assume that if you increase the ground rent, that's the only way people will let house. That is not logical. And that's the point I'm making. Now you can send out and engage a research company and say, okay, if you go and consult African Development Study Center and said, go to Abuja, check out what we have. There are houses that are not let. Find out why people...
Or come to Lagos even. We still have such buildings around Ikoyi, VI, and those areas.
And see why these houses are not in use. Then, of course, you will have data to be able to reach a reasoned consideration to say, yes, these houses are not let because of XYZ factors. Now, this can be done. Now, if these are property developers, if you come to the mainland in Lagos, you see a lot of people who are developing property. Some of these property have been developed in the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And of course, nobody has been able to purchase it because the guy who is selling is factoring in the cost of fund, is factoring in the cost of the land, the cost of the building, everything. And that's what's going to determine the selling price of the property. And I don't think that it is a place of the government to determine, number one, how this land should be used. Number two, is also to realize, and I think the Minister of Housing should also realize that land holding does not belong to the federal government. That by the Land Use
It
Act
belongs
of
to
1976,
states.
land belongs, and the states are the ones that are holding land in trust for their original owner, not the federal government.
So is this another case of overreach?
That is the point I'm making, because sometimes when you're also making some statements, you have to also look at the loss of the land. Because most of these lands are given on the basis of the certificate of occupancy, which is issued by the state. So if I have a CFO, or that there's a transfer, a deed of assignment, that a property has been transferred to me, which of course has been ratified by the state holding the land in trust for the people. Now, what that means to me is that you cannot determine how I use my land.
Is that actually the way it works in Nigeria? Because there is a Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. So what is the role of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development if it does not have the right to... No, this is not about seizing land, but about how properties are used.
As the name suggests, it is to develop properties, houses, low-cost houses for people, and then make rules or policy how people should build, how estates are licensed, how they collaborate with developers to be able to build this. Like, for example, if you go to the...
so more or less it's about design of the city in terms of housing.
How the city look like is not because the land belongs to the state. It doesn't belong to the federal. So federal don't have land.
So this brings us to collaboration between agencies of government, arms of government being on the same page. That's synergy, which seems to be lacking.
Yeah. No, but I think that people just don't look at the extant laws that establishes them, and before they make statements in the public space. So this is what I say. For example, in Lagos, there's a provision, even within the land use in Lagos, that, for example, if you have a property or you have taken a CFO of a particular land, and after a certain period of time and you have not been able to develop that property, the Lagos state can revoke that CFO.
And I think that applies to other states as well. So
that clause is there. So because there is a provision to be able to revoke a CFO by the state government, it suggests that if there are land that are unused, government can decide to acquire them because the person who has bought it for the period of time that the law allows had not been able to develop it or school. It does mean that you don't have the capacity to develop that. But I think the issue here is because these are houses that are already built. So if the house is already developed, how does it become the problem of government, whether there are...
I think it becomes the problem of government when we're talking about housing deficit. And in areas where houses could have been built by people on their own, it's hard to even have land there because people have bought and built, but they're not utilizing it. So it becomes the concern of government as a way to ensure that people also have access to these properties. You can't be holding a property without you. So the ground rent is more like a tool to sanction those who have properties refusing to sell for whatever reason, refusing to lease.
I don't know how many house units the government itself has built. Ministry of Housing. How many houses?
They haven't built much. That's why they're concerned about the ones that persons have built.
You cannot be an agency that the law established you to do some sanity. Now you can't even do yours. And now what you're looking at is how to go to people who have put money down to do what they should do, and you are thinking that you're finding them will be the best way to motivate them to lease. And I think what the Ministry of Housing should be doing is to copy from what other nations have done, and they have done very well. If you go to the United Arab Emirates, there's a huge collaboration between developing agents and the Ministry of Land. Because in years past, what they discovered in that environment was the fact that a lot of developers were collecting money from people to develop properties, and these houses were not delivered. So what the Ministry of Land eventually did was to ensure that if you have to contribute to developing a property, what they do is that they ensure that the money is not paid into the developer's account. The money is paid into the Ministry of Lands, who will house the money. And then, of course, the developers are able to access those funds based on milestone achieved in terms of development. So what that has enabled people to do is that, so if you want to buy a house in Dubai today, what you do, no matter, depending on the estate developer you are following, you will have to put money in government accounts. And then the estate developer assesses it from government account. And so before it comes for the next tranche of payment, he must have shown that the major milestone that the first payment you have done has achieved. And by this, you see that developers become more transparent in terms of collecting money and not building properties. And that issues were resolved. But what I have here is the fact that there are even a more severe problem, which of course the state needs to tackle. That there are a lot of people, for example, who are contributing to the building of estates, and some of them have contributed over 20 years, and they cannot even sell the property where that estate is, because there is no government regulation of these property developers. Now, that has to be resolved, and that should be within the purview of the Ministry of Housing. That's the point I'm making. Now, what is again, they can't also be thinking about doing is also to see, let's even have federal estates. We used to have federal estates in Lagos here. So where are federal estates that, of course, government itself is investing in?
But they're not sufficient. Even if government builds housing estates yearly, which would not even be possible, the number of housing deficits in Nigeria is more than 20 million. So how many housing units can the federal government or even the state government build to close this gap? We still need private participation, and we still need those who are hoarding, yes, hoarding buildings, to begin to commercialize them.
Yeah, but the point is that, yes, the government can build 20 million house units, but at least can build 2 million.
Yes.
Now, when you build 2 million, what that also means is that you're also reducing the housing deficit yourself, that you are doing and working at reducing housing deficit by yourself. But what that also would mean is that you're also creating a competitive environment. So that, oh yes, you're creating a competitive environment. Now, if citizens have alternative, they don't need to resort to private. So the market ties money down there forever. So common sense will make him to say, oh, if these people have alternative, then I have to review my price downwards. Now, the problem we're having is the government don't have houses that are alternative. So people are now left
at the mercy of the private investors.
Developers. So who can determine what cost they are going to sell their property or not? So you can't control that because you are not investing in the sector. So government need to invest in that sector to be able to create a competition to say, well, if people can't take this one, then they have alternative to go to. So this is the thing that we can also do. And don't forget, I've said it here several times on this table. And I think the time has also even come that the Ministry of Housing must also be thinking, especially talking about urban development, that we must be thinking of vertical development and leave the arena of horizontal development, because we are not making plans to accommodate the extra 200 more citizens that we are expecting in about 20 years' time.
Okay, according to the Minister of Housing and Urban Development, he says that legal experts are also reviewing the best approach to implement these measures so that it do not infringe on property rights. And he also gave details of what they're doing regarding the Renewed Hope housing projects, which he says that they want to crack down on the poor work that some contractors are doing, trying to cut corners, use substandard materials to construct buildings, which I think that the government should really put an eye on. If government is putting in money to develop housing projects, then it should be there should be monitored to ensure that contractors don't just come and do substandard work, houses that are not durable, houses that are poorly built. So those who would come on board, those who will buy those houses at the end of the day, have value for their money. It's a good thing. Then I think it also addresses security issue when this issue of unoccupied buildings are handled the best way. Because some of them are hideouts for criminals, they are hideouts for kidnappers. We've seen some of these buildings being demolished when there is information or intelligence reports stating that some of them are used to harbor kidnapped victims. So it's good that the government knows what goes on in some of these buildings. But just like the minister said, that they are consulting with legal experts to determine the best approach towards this.
Yeah, but I also think that they also need to liaise with Federal Mortgage Bank. There are people who have been contributing money all their work life to ensure that Mortgage Bank is also developing and delivering houses to people who contribute. Because what we have also seen is that you have the Federal Mortgage Bank who is taking money from civil servants, and then they leave service and they are really not able to own a home. So how is, of course, they are also overseeing these activities to ensure that as civil servants are taking money and they are putting in Mortgage Bank, and they don't die without having a home.
And then the bottlenecks are not such that it frustrates the civil servants. They're unable to meet the requirements or go through the bottleneck to be able to have access to the monies that are being contributed towards housing scheme. All right, move away to another interesting matter. Today, the stories are just very, very interesting. So, you know what they say, you can't give what you don't have. So you must have been able to feed yourself before you can offer food to a visitor or to someone else. But this time around, let's see if Nigeria has enough to attend to this demand. So African countries are seeking help from Nigeria as citizens buy fuel at over 8,000 naira per liter. Niger Republic has turned to Nigeria for fuel supplies despite tension between Nigeria and the Niger Republic in recent months. So the African country is facing severe petrol shortages, pushing petrol prices to as high as 8,000 naira per liter. Permit me to go this way. Shakara don't end. I thought Niger was saying Nigeria should not come to Niger. So what happened to that?
Well, you see, but again, is to say that two are better than one.
Yes.
And we are better together than, of course, each person trying to create an empire, which has been really the problem in Africa. And don't forget, when Ambassador Wallace was on show, I think on Thursday, he had this whole lot of argument where, of course, you see African countries really do not understand the value of unity among themselves. And we are not really working hard to see how we can work together. You see, yeah, of course, this is where we are, because we're relying on a power that is outside of you, and now that source has closed, and then, of course, you have to look for alternative. Thank God that Nigeria has a very large heart, and I think we have done this over the years in terms of how to support our African countries. Don't forget the Nigerian foreign policy model. They call it the three concentric circle. It starts with ECOWAS, then, of course, African Union, and then, of course, the globe. So which means we put emphasis on neighboring countries, and that is quite very instructive. So we can't turn a blind eye to Niger, because what that means is that if Hashi become too terrible in Niger, definitely, of course, you'll have influence of Nigerians into our country, and that, of course, can also constitute a crisis on its own. And of course, it's not just Niger. Of course, we're going to expect that Chad is going to have same challenge.
Yeah, I think Benin Republic is also having a similar challenge.
Niger, Benin Republic. And so all these things are issues that we talked about. But again, you remember, and this was what the president was saying when he had a meeting with some group last week. And he said, look, you see, there was no logic that Nigeria is playing Father Christmas by supplying petrol to all neighboring countries and subsidizing everybody, including those ones that are able to pay. Now you can see what that means. That really, when we have closed our border, we understand that, look, this issue was that Nigeria was actually paying for almost the entire ECOWAS states.
While Nigeria was bearing the cost.
So the subsidy was not just for Nigeria alone. Of course, this has come to prove that very right. You can imagine, we are talking about 1,000 petrol price, too expensive. Now we are talking about
8,000 naira.
860 naira.
For
now,
Nigeria.
For our pump price in Nigeria, and compare with 8,000, which is done outside. And this, of course, the federal government knew that has been actually what was behind the smuggling of fuel. Because if you go to, whether it's Badagry here, or you go to Idiruku, or you go to Sokoto, or you go to Kebbi, you see where all this has access to the other country, a lot of petrol was actually moving. Some of them are sold in kegs. And you see what they call it, these small vehicles, load petrol in keg and take across, because it was far cheaper because of the subsidy that was here. And I think that, again, Nigeria can do the comparison. You know, I was just thinking, I can switch to tennis.
Oh, yes, to be nice.
And that's some good money.
Federer is retiring. Some of the names that have been dominating are going. So it's good for new entrants. And, you know, when you wake up is your money. It doesn't matter what they say. So I can just
No,
say that.
I need to connect with Bashali.
I'm not understanding this one anymore.
I need to win.
All right, winning is what everyone loves. And you know the success has many, many friends. Failure, everyone disowns. But we want to have more friends, so we must continue to win. I am Blessing Eichie. Thank you for watching the show today. Let's do it again tomorrow. The time will be 7 a.m. African time. West African time. And don't forget that there's media news, there's also word news that will come your way today on Sook News TV, as well as interesting programs. And from Dr. Idahosa Osamhanze.
See, talking about winning, the opportunities are out there in Nigeria. We call on you, you're a Nigerian in the diaspora, is getting better at home. Put your money into this environment, there's huge return on investment. Don't lose hope. Like they say, living dog is better than a dead lion. And there's so much to hope for in Nigeria. And we continue to bring you those opportunities and space where you can put your money and get better return from it. And tomorrow we do this again. Remain yours sincerely, Idahosa.